In the National Forest of Oregon, there is a rule. If you hear footsteps matching your pace, do not stop. That evening I stopped, and whatever stood in the darkness beside me turned out to be far more patient than any person. My name is Logan Pierce. This happened in Oregon in a national forest near an old logging road called Service Road 18. I went there late in November toward evening because I wanted to cut across to the parking area using a short hiking trail that looked simple and safe during daylight. I was alone, without a tent, without a spare light, without any real plan for the night, because I expected to be back at my pickup within an hour. The problem did not begin suddenly. It started quietly, the way it does in real life. First, I noticed the trail narrowing. Then the markers on the trees disappeared. Then the path split into two old tracks, and I chose the wrong one. Because the lower one looked more worn, I walked for another 20 minutes, fully convinced I would reach my truck from the other side. By the time evening settled completely between the fir trees, I was already checking my phone every few minutes, even though there was no signal. The map would not load, the compass lagged, the battery kept dropping, and the forest became so quiet that my own footsteps sounded unnaturally loud. That was when I heard another set. They were moving to my right, somewhere between the trees, keeping exactly the same distance. I stopped and they stopped too. I moved again, and after a few seconds the sound returned. Heavy, careful, with pauses, as if someone was adjusting to my pace. It was not a deer, not a coyote, and not a random hiker avoiding contact. Someone was walking alongside me and staying in the dark. I suddenly aimed my headlamp to the right and caught only a fragment of a dark jacket behind a fallen trunk. The person instantly crouched and disappeared. After that, there was no normal explanation left in my head. I did not shout. I did not investigate. I just moved faster downhill, convinced the road would lead to the parking area. A few minutes later, I reached an old yellow barrier broken in half. Beyond it ran a wider forest road once used by heavy equipment. In the mud beneath the barrier, there was a fresh boot print. Large, clear, deep, not mine. And it was going in the same direction as me. I had a small folding knife, some water, a phone at 12%, and a cheap windbreaker in conditions like that. You stop thinking about pride or logic very quickly. There is only one thing left in your head. Do not let yourself get cut off from the road. I moved faster, almost breaking into a run, and that was when the footsteps shifted behind me. I turned and saw him clearly for the first time. A tall man in a gray work jacket, a dark cap, and dirty pants stood about 30 meters away between the trees. I could not see his face, but in his hand he held something long, like a pipe or a handle. He did not call out, did not ask for help, did nothing human. He simply stood there, and then started walking straight toward me. I stepped back and understood the main thing. If I ran along the road, he would follow the same line and eventually catch up. But if I cut into the forest, I had a chance to break his rhythm. I bolted left past an old container, jumped over wet boards, and nearly fell into a narrow ditch. Behind me, the steps turned fast immediately. No more masking, he started running too. I slid down a slope, barely kept my footing, and burst onto an overgrown track. The beam of my light flickered, branches cut my face, the backpack dragged me backward. I could hear him somewhere above and to the right. He was not falling behind. He was keeping parallel, as if he knew where I would come out. Then something metal struck a tree in front of me so sharply that I instinctively ducked. He was no longer just chasing me. He was trying to knock me down. I cut into a young pine stand where it was tight and hard to run, but even harder to swing a pipe quickly. There between the trunks, I suddenly saw a faint yellow light, low and trembling, as if there was a small shack or an old service trailer with a lamp somewhere ahead. I moved straight toward that light because there was no other option left. It was an old service trailer, half collapsed, with a crooked door and one dark window without glass. I rushed inside, shoved the door with my shoulder, and braced it with a metal table standing against the wall. Inside it smelled of dampness, old oil, and something else, heavy and stale, as if no one had worked there for a long time. But someone came in occasionally. I stood behind the table, gasping for air and listening. Outside it became quiet. Not normal quiet, but the kind that freezes your spine. Because when a person suddenly stops making noise in the dark, it means they are already close and do not want you to know where exactly. Then a slow, metallic scraping moved along the outer wall of the trailer, from the far corner to the door, steady, unhurried, as if he was deliberately dragging the pipe across the metal so I would hear every foot of that path. The scraping stopped at the entrance. The first ooder hit near the lock. Short, precise, strong, the second higher, the third into the top hinge. I realized this was not some panicked lunatic striking randomly. The person outside knew exactly how to break weak points quickly. I pressed my whole body against the table and pulled out the knife, even though I understood how useless it was against a grown man with a pipe. The door shook again. The wood near the frame cracked. The upper hinge groaned as if it was about to give. That was when I glanced to the left and saw something I had missed in the panic. Near the wall lay an old hunting backpack, dirty and torn, and beside it a single boot and an empty water bottle. Not trash, not debris, but someone's belongings dropped in a hurry. In that moment, I understood he might have done this before. Another ooder, and the door bent inward a few inches. I grabbed a rusted canister from the side and threw it into the gap just to break his rhythm. I heard a muffled curse, and a short step back. It was enough. I shoved the table aside, rushed to the window without glass, tore my hand on the metal edge, and dropped into wet bushes behind the trailer. I fell, got up, slipped again, but kept running downhill, not along the road, but diagonally through the forest. Behind me, he coughed or swore once. Then the cracking of branches returned. He followed. I began weaving between trees, falling to my knees, getting up, slipping on leaves, my right hand already numb, soaked with blood and mud. A few times it felt like I had lost him. But then from the left or right came the same dry snap, the same pace, the same distance. He was not running blindly. He was guiding me. At some point I dropped behind a fallen tree and froze, pressing my face into wet moss, trying not to breathe loudly. Footsteps passed somewhere close, about 20 feet away, then stopped. It was the worst minute of my life, because I was almost certain he was standing there, just watching into the darkness, waiting for me to break first. Then somewhere far below, I heard an engine, faint, dull, but human. I stood up and moved toward the sound, no longer hiding. My strength was gone, my legs were shaking, there was a metallic taste in my mouth. But now I was moving only toward that noise. A few minutes later, I stepped onto a gravel forest road right in front of an old service pickup. The driver slammed the brakes so hard the vehicle swerved, and I grabbed the door before he could say anything. I was covered in mud, blood, scratches, barely able to speak, but one look at me was enough for them to let me in. In the morning, we returned with the sheriff. The trailer was there, the container was there, my blood beneath the window was there, my tracks were there too. But on the door he had been striking, they found almost nothing fresh. only old rust and older cracks. And behind the trailer in the wet ground, there were only my footprints. The sheriff said I had been in panic, that I could have mistaken things, that the darkness and exhaustion might have gotten into my head. I almost agreed, until I reached into my jacket pocket for my pickup keys. They were not there. My keys were not found in the forest, not on the road, but on the floor inside the trailer, next to that backpack and the single boot. I clearly remember they were with me while I was running, because I checked my phone lower down while holding the keys in the same hand. Which means at some point in the darkness, he got close enough to take them from me, or rip them away, and I did not even feel it. After that night, I stopped going into the forest alone. And even now, when I hear footsteps not behind me but somewhere to the side in the dark, the same cold runs through me, because I know exactly how a person sounds when they are not lost, not running, not afraid, but simply walking beside you until they decide you are far enough away from everyone. He did not want to kill us right away. He wanted to play. First he took the car keys, then he touched the children's tent, and in the end, he left a wet river stone in the pocket of my 8-year-old son. The first time I realized that someone was near our camp was even before full darkness, when the sun was already sinking behind the trees and the river began to sound heavier and duller, as if something large was moving along the bank downstream. And at that exact moment, from the forest to our right, came the steady crack of branches, heavy, slow, unmistakably human. We had come as a family for one night. Me, my wife, our 8-year-old son, and our younger daughter. A normal trip with nothing reckless, no alcohol, no company, just an old tent, folding chairs, a grill, the river below the slope, and dense forest on 3 sides. The place was remote but not wild. My father used to come there years ago, and I remembered that clearing as calm. While I was setting up the tent, the children were moving near the water. My wife was arranging our things, and everything still looked normal. Then a dog from another camp, somewhere farther up the road, barked a few short times, and suddenly went silent. And that felt wrong, because the forest before night usually carries sound. But here it was, as if everything had been muted. Around 7, I first noticed footprints in the damp sand near our bag of firewood. They were fresh, deep, clearly from an adult man, leading not toward the water, but from the forest into our camp, and then disappearing on the harder ground. I immediately told myself they could have been old tracks I had missed earlier, but I did not believe that even for a second. I started scanning the edges of the clearing more often than I should have, and almost immediately caught movement between the trunks about 30 meters away. Something dark shifted position and then froze. Not an animal, not a deer. Too high, too still. And when I walked in that direction, there was nothing there anymore. I did not want to scare the family. I simply brought the children closer to the fire, checked the flashlights, put a folding knife into my pocket, and took an axe from the car that I had used to split wood. My wife immediately understood that something was wrong with me, but I only said that someone was probably nearby and that we should stay together. The sun dropped quickly, shadows stretched, the river disappeared into darkness before the forest did. And that was when we heard the steps again. Slow, careful, neither closer nor farther, as if someone was moving in a circle around the clearing and measuring the distance. I took the flashlight and shined it between the trees, but the beam caught only trunks, bushes, and damp fog hanging low over the ground. Within minutes, the children were already inside the tent. My wife was packing the remaining veschi without saying anything, and I stood near the car and listened. Then from the left, where the forest came almost right up to our spot, something made a short, metallic sound. I turned sharply and saw that someone had touched the rear fender of the car. Not hard, just enough to confirm it was there. I rushed there, went around the car, shined under the wheels, into the bushes, onto the road, and saw no one. But on the dust of the rear door there was already a fresh handprint, long, dirty, with clear fingers, and after that I stopped trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. We began to pack to leave, and at that exact moment I realized the keys were not in the jacket pocket where I had kept them all evening. I overturned the table, chairs, bags, the ground under my feet. My wife was lighting everything with her phone. The children were already crying in the tent, and inside me something tightened because I understood a simple thing. If the keys had not fallen, they had been taken. I went back to the fire, because that was the last place I had bent down, and I found them in the darkness behind a stump, about 4 meters from where they should have been. Not lost, not dropped. They had been placed there deliberately. Someone had come very close to us, taken the keys, carried them aside, and left them where I would still find them. At that moment, the forest to the right cracked loudly, as if someone stepped on a dry branch with full weight. No longer hiding, I shined the light there and for a second saw a person between the trees, thin, tall, wearing a dark jacket, without a flashlight, without a backpack, completely still, just standing and watching us. I lunged forward with the axe in my hand, and the figure immediately moved deeper into the forest at a fast walking pace, not running as if it knew the terrain better than I did. I followed for about 10 meters and stopped because I heard my wife scream behind me. When I turned back, someone was already pulling the zipper of the tent from the other side. I reached the tent in seconds, struck the fabric from the side with the flashlight, and heard whoever was there jump back sharply into the darkness. My wife was pulling the children outside. My son was choking on his crying. My daughter could not stand, and I no longer doubted that this was not fear or a joke. We were being tested, separated, pushed, until one of us would be left alone. I shoved the children into the back seat, my wife into the passenger seat, threw our things in without order, and got behind the wheel. But the engine did not start on the first try. The old battery had worked fine before, but now the starter turned heavy and slow, and in that short pause between attempts, I saw in the mirror that same figure step out of the forest and stop right at the edge of the headlights. The engine caught. I slammed the gear and reversed hard, turning almost into the pines. The car slid, the wheels spun on wet ground, and I felt a heavy, dull odor on the rear, as if someone had deliberately struck the trunk with something solid. My wife screamed, the children too. But I was already focused only on the narrow road out. We had not gone more than 100 meters when around a bend, the headlights revealed a young, fallen tree across the path. It lay too evenly, too perfectly timed, fresh, still with leaves, and it took me only a second to understand that reversing was dangerous, because we would be driven back into the darkness. So I jumped out with the axe and began cutting thinner branches to force the car through sideways. From the forest to the left, the steps came again. Slow, unhurried, closer than before. I worked quickly, but my hands felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but because my mind was already imagining someone stepping out of the dark straight toward me while my family sat locked in the car, unable to do anything. Then I heard another sound that felt truly wrong. The rear door handle moved once, then again, someone was already at the car while I was a few meters away. I dropped the axe, rushed back, and shined the light, but saw only a back slipping between the trees. I got behind the wheel again, pressed the bumper against the trunk, and risking damaging the car, I simply pushed forward. The tree shifted, jumped, one side slid into the ditch, and we had just enough space. We broke through, but the road ahead ran along the river, narrow, with dark holes and roots, and I could not drive fast. All that time it felt like we were being caught. I checked the mirrors every 2 seconds, expecting light, steps, an impact, anything. There was nothing, and that pressed even harder. Because when a pursuer disappears, you start expecting him not behind you, but ahead, at the next point where the road narrows, where you will have to slow down, where he will already be waiting. At the exit to the dirt road, I stopped for a second because I heard a strange whistling from the roof. I shined upward and saw a thin, wet rope caught between the rails, something I had definitely not attached. It hung down along the side to the rear door window. Someone had managed to throw it onto the car while I was moving the tree, and I still do not know why. We reached the nearest gas station about 20 minutes later. There were people, cameras, light, and only there I could properly inspect the car. There was a deep dent on the trunk, dirty smears on the rear door, and on the right side, near my daughter's door handle, a long, scratched line, as if someone had dragged a knife or a nail along the metal while the car was moving. I told everything to the police that same night. They went to the location by morning, but found nothing useful except our camp, the fallen tree, and tracks around the clearing. One officer said it could have been a local unstable man or a poacher trying to scare us away. I did not care what to call it. The worst came later. For several weeks, I woke up at any sound outside the window, checked the locks 3 times a night, caught myself looking into the yard before stepping out to the car. But what truly broke me was something else. When 2 days later I was unpacking our things, my son's jacket, which had stayed in the car the entire time, was not empty. In the outer pocket, I found a flat river stone, wet, black, with a sharp edge. None of us had put it there. The children had not gone near the river after sunset, which meant that while we were still at that camp, someone had come to the car, opened the door, or reached inside before we started to escape, and left it there quietly, without hurry, almost like a mark. After that night, I never took my family into the forest overnight again, not because of darkness, not because of animals, not because of the river, but because of a simple feeling that somewhere there are people who do not need a reason to walk into a Chijoy camp at dusk, take the keys, touch the car, pull at the zipper of a child's tent, and circle around you until you break. In the forest, it is easy to get used to the sound of branches, but it is impossible to get used to footsteps that stop at the exact moment you stop. I realized I had to turn back the moment I stopped hearing the forest. Up until then, everything had been ordinary. Late autumn, a wet, coniferous forest, an old logging road I had already walked before. After 3 days of rain, the ground had turned soft. Black water filled the ruts. The air was damp and cold. I entered the forest closer to evening, expecting to return to my car within an hour. Nothing complicated. A straight stretch, an old clearing, then back along the same road. The fog appeared quickly. It did not roll in from above and did not drift between the trees. It simply formed between the trunks as a dense white wall. I turned around and could no longer see the clearing I had just walked through. It was already filled with a thick whiteness, as if the space behind me had been poured over with something opaque. I stopped and listened, and that was when I felt the first real tension. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind in the treetops, no birds, no cracking branches, only my breathing Even my own steps in the mud sounded muted, as if sound could not travel more than a few meters here. I started walking back, calmly, without panic, but within a minute I realized the fog was not staying in place. It was already closer. It did not drift or swirl. It simply occupied the space that had been clear moments before. I quickened my pace. Then again, I looked back once more, and the white mass had already swallowed the black stump I had passed. Then a large birch, then a stone covered in moss. I took out my phone. There was no signal. I turned on the flashlight, but the beam only lit up the white haze in front of my face, almost useless. The air suddenly grew colder. From the ground came the smell of rot, wet bark, and metal, distinctly metal, like wet iron or blood on hands. Then I heard a step behind me. One, clear, a wet crunch in the leaves. I stopped immediately. After a second, everything went silent. I slowly turned around, nothing but fog between the trees. I took another step and heard a chojoy step in response. Not from the side, not somewhere far away, but directly behind me, at a distance where in normal visibility, you would already see a person. After that, I moved faster. Running through a wet forest is a mistake, I knew that. You break yourself before you escape. So I kept a steady pace, watched my footing, tried not to lose control, but the steps behind me matched mine. When I stopped, they disappeared. When I moved, they returned. When the fog began closing in, not only from behind, but also from the left between the pines, I stepped off the road. That was a mistake. I wanted to abhod a low area and reach higher ground where the fog should be thinner. Instead, I immediately got into dense, wet undergrowth, fallen trees, and holes hidden under leaves. Within minutes, I was barely keeping my balance. Branches struck my face, sleeves caught on suchki, the ground shifted under my feet. While descending a slippery slope, I lost footing. My legs slid sideways, and I was thrown down into a fallen trunk. I hit my knee hard against a stone, then my shoulder against a dry branch. For a second, everything went dark. And lying there on the wet leaves, I heard it very close. Not a step. Breathing. Short, muffled, wet, as if someone stood in the fog a meter away trying to breathe quietly. I jumped up instantly, swung the flashlight in that direction. The beam caught only white density, but inside that whiteness, something shifted. Not a figure, not a silhouette, just something with volume, darker than the rest, and it was at the height of a human. That was when I ran. I ran as fast as the forest allowed, slipping, crashing into young trunks, breaking branches with my shoulders, grabbing anything that could keep me on my feet. Behind me, the undergrowth snapped. No longer a single step, but continuous movement. Heavy rustling, thin branches cracking, as if the fog itself was moving after me with something inside it. I burst out onto an old clearing. It was torn by deep ruts filled with black water. There I turned and for the first time saw the fog crossing open ground, slowly, evenly, without any wind. Inside it, darker masses moved, gathering and dispersing. It took only a second to understand that if I stopped, it would reach me. Ahead lay a windfall barrier. Going around would take too long, so I climbed straight over it, over one trunk, then another, forcing my way through branches, and my right leg suddenly dropped between the logs up to my thigh. I was stuck. At first I did not believe it was real. I just pulled back. My leg was pinned above the knee. The second attempt brought a sharp pain that twisted my body. The wood had clamped my shin completely. I braced my hands on a wet trunk and pulled again, useless. The fog had already covered the fallen trees. I could not see beyond my outstretched arm. The metallic smell hit stronger. And again, the Chujoi breathing, now to the left, then to the right, then very close, as if right by my ear. I started tearing at my leg without thinking, kicking, twisting my knee, ripping fabric against bark. The pain became so intense I nearly lost control. The boot came off before my leg came free. I yanked it out, still in the sock. Skin torn along the shin, my foot plunged into icy water beneath the logs. But I was already climbing forward. Behind me, something slammed heavily against the wood. Then again and again. It was not random movement. It felt deliberate, as if something followed and struck the trunks so I would hear it. The flashlight slipped from my hand, hit the ground, and went out. After that, there was only a milky white darkness. I moved by touch, holding my hands in front of me, collided with a tree, followed along it, hit another young growth, dense and thin. I forced my way through sideways, because that meant the edge of the old clearing or a slope. Behind me, branches kept breaking, closer now. Then suddenly the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I slid down wet clay, hitting roots with my elbows, and crashed into stones at the bottom of a dry stream bed. I cut my palm, bruised my ribs, but immediately heard the important thing. A faint sound of water to the right, meaning somewhere lower a stream was still alive, and water always leads somewhere. I followed the bed, limping, almost falling, one leg soaked to the bone, the knee buckling from the udder, my chest burning from the cold air. The fog still trailed me, sometimes entering the stream bed, but not as dense as if it was stronger between the trees. Something kept moving behind me for a long time, sometimes close, sometimes farther. I did not turn around again. Then I heard a metallic udder, distant and dull, then another. I recognized the sound, an old sheet of metal on a barrier near the forest road. The wind was striking it against the post. I moved faster, as much as I could. When I reached the road, the fog remained among the trees. It did not cross the edge of the forest. It simply stood there as a white wall in the darkness, at the limit of visibility. I reached the car barefoot on my right foot, covered in mud, blood, and cold. I locked the doors before I even sat properly. My hands were shaking so badly, I could not insert the key into the ignition at once. Before starting the engine, I looked back into the forest one more time. The fog stood motionless between the trunks, and it seemed to me that inside it, at my height, someone was also standing and looking back. The next day, I returned there with two people. We found the place where I had fallen on the slope, blood on the stones in the stream bed, my boot in the windfall, but at the spot where my leg had been trapped between the logs. On the wet ground, there were only my footprints, no others. I realized we might not survive when the footsteps started moving around us. Not behind us, around us. Slow, controlled, as if they were cutting off every possible way out. That was the moment everything shifted from fear to certainty. This was not random. We were being guided somewhere. I still remember the exact moment I understood we were not alone in that woods. It was not something sudden or obvious. No branch snapping, no scream. Just a feeling, like someone was staring directly into the back of my head. Precise, persistent. It did not go away, even when I turned around. We entered the woods in the evening. My friend Brandon and I were both 16 at the time. We wanted to take a shortcut home because it was faster than going around the road. We knew the edge of the woods well, but we had never gone deeper. That was our first mistake. At first, everything felt normal. Gray sky, cold air, silence, too much silence. Even the wind was not moving the trees. The problem started when we realized we had gone deeper than planned. The path disappeared. Completely. We kept walking for about 10 minutes, thinking it would show up again, but it never did. Instead, the trees grew denser and darker. There were no gaps between them anymore. That was when I stopped for the first time, because I felt it again. Someone was watching. I did not say anything at first. I just turned my head slowly. Nothing. Only trees. But the tension was already there, deep in my chest, like right before a fight. Brandon stopped too. No words. He just looked at me, then back into the woods. He felt it as well. We did not discuss it. We simply turned around and started walking back. That was when I noticed something was wrong. Our footprints were gone. We had been walking on damp ground, soft in places, but behind us there was nothing. Clean, like we had never been there. I checked again, walked forward and back. The footprints appeared under my feet, and then disappeared a few meters behind me. Something dropped inside me at that moment. We did not talk about it. We just picked up the pace. Then something moved on the left. Not a branch, not an animal running away. It was controlled, slow, like someone carefully shifting position to avoid being seen. I turned sharply toward it. Between the trees there was darkness, deeper than the rest of the woods. And inside that darkness, something was there. I could not see a clear shape, but I knew it was standing and watching. I did not look away, and I felt it not moving either. Like we were staring at each other. Brandon grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. We were no longer walking, we were almost running. That was when the sounds began. Footsteps, not ours. First one, then another. Slow, with gaps between them. On the left, then on the right. As if something was circling us. We stopped at the same time. The footsteps stopped too. My heart was pounding in my throat. The air felt colder, heavier. And then I understood the worst part. It was not one thing. There were more of them. And they were not in a hurry. They were following us. We did not agree to run. We just broke into a sprint at the same moment. At first, straight ahead. Then I suddenly turned right because it seemed slightly lighter there. Brandon followed without hesitation. But the footsteps changed direction too. They were not chasing, they were adjusting. That was the most terrifying part. If they were just chasing us, we could have run faster. But this felt different, like we were being guided. After 2 minutes, I started losing breath. My chest was burning, my legs felt heavy. We were no longer choosing a direction. We were just trying to get away from those sounds. Then one of them got closer. I heard a clear step behind me, not to the side, directly behind me. I turned for a second. That was enough. Between the trees, about 10 meters away, stood a man. He looked ordinary. Dark jacket, hood. I could not see his face clearly, but he was not hiding. He stood in the open, completely still, like he was waiting. In that moment, I understood he was not alone. Deeper between the trees, there were more silhouettes, positioned, not random. They were blocking directions, cutting off paths. I turned sharply and pulled Brandon in another direction. That was when it became clear. We were not lost. We were being led. The footsteps returned, faster now, no longer careful. They were closing in. I do not remember how long we ran after that. Everything blurred together. Trees, darkness, branches hitting my face, until we suddenly crashed into an old ditch. I fell first, rolled down, hit my shoulder hard. Brandon fell beside me. For a second, we both just lay there without moving. Then I whispered for him not to get up. We pressed ourselves into the ground. The footsteps came closer, very close. I could hear someone walking above us, along the edge. The ground shifted slightly under their weight. Then another, and another. They stopped, right above us. I held my breath until my vision started fading. Then someone slowly climbed down. I could only see his legs, boots. He took a few steps, stopped, and just stood there. No sound, no movement. Like he was listening. I was sure that if he took one more step, he would run straight into me. 10 seconds passed, maybe more. Then he turned and climbed back up. The footsteps started moving away. We stayed there for another 5 minutes without moving. Then we slowly climbed out and walked in the opposite direction. We did not run anymore, just moved quietly, trying not to make noise. After some time, we reached a road. We did not say a word. We never went back into that woods again. And I am still certain about one thing. Those were not random people. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they definitely saw us in that ditch. They just chose not to hurry. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when there was no one around? Because that was exactly what it felt like the moment we reached the slope of Glacier Peak, late in the evening, when the light was already fading and the mountain felt too quiet to be empty. I went up there with my girlfriend Carrie, expecting nothing more than cold air, silence, and the kind of isolation you only find deep in the wilderness. But almost immediately, something felt wrong, as if the mountain itself was aware of us and did not want us there. The snow creaked under our boots. The fog rolled in like a heavy, damp blanket, and the air felt so thick that every breath pressed against my chest, slow and uncomfortable, as if even breathing required permission. We moved carefully, trying not to disturb the silence, but I could feel something unseen following every step, something patient, something that did not need to be visible to be close. That was when I saw him. A man stood on a rocky ledge above us, completely wrapped in a wolf's pelt, the animal's head resting over his own like a mask, claws extending from the sleeves, the fur blending into stone and fog, while his eyes burned with a cold, unnatural light that did not belong to anything living. He did not move, not even slightly, as if he had been carved into the mountain itself, and yet his gaze locked onto me with a weight that felt physical, like pressure against my skin. The wind stopped, the snow seemed to hang in place, and even the distant sounds of the mountain vanished, leaving nothing but us and that figure watching from above. With every passing second, the tension tightened. The tracks in the snow beneath our feet no longer looked fully human or fully animal, repeating our steps too precisely, as if something else was walking with us, measuring us. We began to step back slowly, choosing every movement with care, and I felt a strange pull beneath my feet, as if the slope itself wanted to drag us down into something hidden, while the man in the wolfskin stood there like a living part of that trap. Then a low, rough growl cut through the silence. I froze, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud enough for the mountain to hear, and out of the fog, a real wolf emerged, large, tense, its fur raised, its eyes glowing with a raw animal hunger that felt focused and deliberate. It stopped a few meters away, studying us, then shifting its attention to the man on the ledge. And in that moment, I understood something simple and terrifying. This place had rules, and we had already broken them. The wolf lowered itself slowly, muscles tightening, ready to move at any second. But it stayed still, as if waiting for something, or someone, to decide what would happen next. Every step we took echoed too loudly in the snow. Every breath felt like a mistake. And when the man slightly tilted his head toward the wolf, I felt something pass between them. Something silent and controlled. Something that made it clear they were not separate. The fog thickened. The wind returned in slow, rising waves, and it felt less like weather and more like pressure building around us, like the mountain itself closing in. We moved without speaking, descending the narrow, slippery path, but the sense of being watched never faded. Not for a second. The man remained on the ledge, completely still, while the wolf followed us at a distance, appearing and disappearing in the fog like a living shadow that could be anywhere at any time. That was when I realized we were not simply leaving, we were being allowed to leave, and only because something had decided we could. Even when we tried to disappear into the fog, those cold eyes and that quiet, predatory presence stayed with us, as if distance meant nothing here. The darkness thickened around us. Each step grew heavier. The snow beneath our feet cracked like bones, and the wind turned into something that sounded almost like whispering. Too close, too deliberate. We kept walking, but every turn of the path, every shift in the terrain only confirmed that something was still moving with us, just out of sight, never losing us. The shadows of the rocks stretched longer, the faint sound of fur brushing against stone, and the low, distant growl followed us, steady, patient, never rushing. I understood then that we would not leave Glacier Peak unchanged, that something from this place had already marked us, and that those two figures, the man and the wolf, had already done what they were meant to do. And when the fog finally swallowed us completely, cutting off the last trace of the path behind, I realized something far worse than fear. This mountain does not simply let people go. Sometimes you walk away, but a part of you stays behind, held in that silence, watched from somewhere just beyond sight. And somewhere in that darkness, behind every tree, behind every rock, the man in the wolf's skin and the wolf itself are still there, waiting for the next person who thinks the mountain is empty. And I know one thing with absolute certainty: they never let go of those who have seen them for what they truly are. Imagine you turn onto an empty road late at night, thinking it is a shortcut home, and within minutes you realize that the road seems to have vanished from every map, and every turn only takes you deeper into the unknown. I do not remember how I ended up on that road, and the farther I drove, the less I understood where I was. It started as a simple decision to leave the highway and shorten the way home. But within minutes, the winding path turned into a narrow, nearly abandoned road, surrounded by trees hanging so low, it felt like they were trying to suffocate the headlights. I tried to find reference points on my phone, but the map stubbornly showed only a gray void, as if nothing existed here. And with every mile, that feeling grew stronger, forcing my heart to beat faster. At first, I thought it was just a poorly marked forest area, but soon I realized the distance was stretching in an unnatural way. Turn after turn looked identical. Signs flashed by but never pointed to a town or highway, and the fuel that should have lasted another hour began to disappear faster than logic allowed. I tried to turn around, to find any branch leading back. But every time the road split, both sides looked exactly the same, like a mirrored copy of the section I had just driven. After some time, I noticed strange objects along the roadside. An old chilled TM's doll, half destroyed, its eyes scratched out or painted over. Then a rusted bicycle, twisted and abandoned, as if someone had left it in a hurry. They appeared every few hundred meters, never identical, always slightly different, as if someone was moving them. And for a moment I thought I heard a faint creaking of branches, but there was no wind and nothing alive around me. I saw another car on the opposite lane, dim headlights passing by, and for a split second I saw the driver. But when I tried to meet his eyes, the car was gone. Minutes later, I pulled over, turned on hazard lights, stepped out trying to understand where I was. But the ground was covered in fog so thick the headlights only illuminated a small patch ahead, and every attempt to find direction ended with me returning to the same doll, the same rusted bicycle, the same turn I had already seen. With every mile, the feeling grew stronger that something was wrong. The silence was heavy, so dense it felt like I could hear my own pulse inside my ears, and the road seemed to mock me, repeating the same fragments again and again. I tried calling friends, but the signal disappeared. The phone showed no coverage, even though I was only 20 kilometers from the nearest town. Then I turned on the car navigation, but it led me in circles. Every attempt to escape brought me back to the same turn, the same doll on the roadside, the same feeling that someone was watching, even though no one was there. Hours passed and the road did not end. I began to notice small signs, barely visible, branches arranged in crosses, small stones laid in patterns like arrows that appeared and disappeared, and I understood they were not random. That realization turned into panic when I understood I was not just lost. It felt like I had entered a section of road that was not made for people but designed to confuse them. And the more I tried to speed up or choose a direction, the more everything repeated. At some point, I saw an old car abandoned on the roadside, its doors open toward the wind. I stopped, my heart pounding, my breathing uneven. On the seat lay a notebook, its pages filled with unreadable scribbles, rough sketches of the road and arrows pointing in different directions. Notes written in a chaotic hand, as if someone had tried to describe their attempts to escape and failed every time. And the fear tightened in my chest as I realized this had not happened to me first. I returned to my car and turned on the headlights again, hoping the light would show a way out. But all I saw was the same road, the same fog, the same objects repeating with tiny changes, as if time and space here did not follow normal rules. I turned on the radio, hoping to hear something familiar, but every station gave only static, and sometimes through it came a faint sound that resembled quiet laughter or the rustle of footsteps. I drove the entire night, and when morning came, the road finally led me onto a small dirt track that connected to the highway. I noticed dozens of notifications on my phone, missed calls from friends, messages, and the clock on the dashboard showed a time several hours later than I remembered. No map I checked showed the existence of that road, and later searches said there were no roads in that forest area, and no one had ever reported anything unusual. Now, when I drive familiar roads at night, I'm afraid to take the wrong turn, because I understand there are places not everyone comes back from, and sometimes the road itself decides when to let you go. I realized we were not going to make it out of there before it even got fully dark. The woods just went silent, not quiet, but empty, like something had been switched off. In that silence, a feeling appeared that I cannot explain, like something was already standing between the trees and watching us. We had not seen it yet, but it already knew exactly where we were. At first, we did not understand that we were being watched. It started with something simple, a silence that felt wrong. The woods near the lake should have been alive with sound. Wind, water, insects. But after we walked a few hundred meters away from the car, everything stopped. Only our breathing and our footsteps remained. My wife Megan and I came there to spend the night. It was a normal idea, just to escape the city and set up a tent near the water. The lake was small and surrounded by dense pine trees. The road ended about a kilometer away, and after that, there was only a narrow trail. It felt isolated but safe at first. Nothing seemed strange in the beginning. We set up the tent, unpacked our things, and turned on a small lantern. The light barely reached the trees. Beyond it, there was only a solid wall of darkness. That was when I noticed it first. Not a sound, just a feeling. It felt like something was standing between the trees and watching us. Not moving, not coming closer, just standing there. I did not say anything right away because it is easy to blame that on stress or exhaustion. But when Megan also started looking around, I understood it was not just me. We shined the flashlight into the woods several times. The beam moved across tree trunks, branches, and wet ground. Nothing. No movement at all. But the feeling did not go away. It only became stronger, like whatever was watching knew that we could not see it. We decided to stay close to the water and not go deeper into the woods. The lake at least gave us open space on one side, but it did not help. The feeling was not coming from one direction. It was everywhere. When it got completely dark, we turned off the lantern so our eyes could adjust. That made it worse. You start seeing shapes that are not there. Forms appear between the trees and disappear the moment you look directly at them. Your peripheral vision begins to work against you. Then I realized something was actually moving. Very slowly. So slowly that the brain cannot register it as movement. I stared at one spot between the trees and felt certain something was there. When I looked away, it was gone. When I looked back, it was slightly closer, slightly shifted. It felt like it was adjusting to the way we were looking at it. We sat closer to each other without speaking. We both felt it. Then the worst part started. Footsteps, not nearby, not directly behind us. Somewhere deeper between the trees. Quiet, uneven, with pauses, and they were not getting closer. They were moving in circles, like something was walking around us and keeping its distance. We turned the flashlight on again. The beam cut a piece out of the darkness, but everything beyond it became even darker. And in that darkness, something was standing there. I did not see a clear shape or a face, but for a fraction of a second, the light touched something vertical between two trees. It did not look human, and it did not step back when we pointed the light at it. It just stopped moving. That was when I understood something important. It was not afraid of the light. We stopped pretending to stay calm. The only plan was to wait for morning. But the night was just beginning. The footsteps disappeared, and that was worse than hearing them. Because now we did not know where it was. I started listening to the water. Even the lake had changed. Instead of natural sounds, there were short splashes, like something touching the surface and then disappearing immediately. Then silence again. At some point, we heard a sound right behind the tent. Very close. Not a step, not a branch snapping, something else. Like a hand slowly sliding across the fabric. I froze. Megan froze too. The sound came again, slow and careful, like something was testing what it was touching. I suddenly opened the tent and pointed the flashlight behind us. Nothing. But the ground was slightly pressed down, not like animal tracks, more like something heavy had been standing in one place. And there was something else. The marks did not lead toward the tent. They were already there, like it had been standing behind us before we even heard it. We did not wait anymore. We grabbed only what we needed and decided to go back to the car immediately, even in the dark. That was a mistake. The trail looks different at night. What feels simple during the day turns into a maze. The flashlight creates a narrow tunnel, and everything outside of it disappears. We walked fast, then faster, and then again. Footsteps. This time closer. No pauses. It was not circling anymore. It was following us. I did not turn around. I did not want to see it. But the sound was already close enough to understand something was wrong. It did not sound like two legs. It was something else. The rhythm was uneven, like there were more points of contact with the ground. We were almost running now. Branches were hitting our arms and faces. I was no longer watching my step. Then Megan fell. A short scream, and the silence broke again. I turned back, and for the first time, I saw it fully. It was standing between the trees, only a few meters away. Tall. Wrong. The limbs were too long, completely out of proportion. It was not moving, but it felt like it was already right next to us, like distance did not matter. I grabbed Megan and pulled her up. We did not say anything. We just moved. When we reached the road, the sound stopped instantly, like it had been cut off. We did not stop until we got to the car. We locked ourselves inside and stayed there without moving. And only then I noticed the last thing. On the dirty glass of the door from the inside, a thin line, slowly drawn from top to bottom, like someone had dragged a finger from the inside. I never believed the stories about that forest. The locals called it the rotten horror. Not because of the smell and not because of the swamps, but because of something else they could not explain with words, because of what happened to people there. I was 32. I did trail running, and I considered rural legends nothing more than decoration for a boring life. So one October day, I put on my running shoes, took my phone, and went in. The first 30 minutes felt normal. Pine trees, moss, the damp smell of rotting leaves, the occasional distant knocking of a woodpecker somewhere off to the side. The trail was easy. I was not in a hurry. Just walking, listening to the silence. And it was silence. Real silence. Only later did I realize the birds had gone quiet long before I noticed. It was not sudden. Just a moment where I became aware that there was nothing around me except the sound of my own steps. I stopped. The forest stood completely still. No wind, no rustling. Even my own breathing felt too loud, almost inappropriate in that dense, heavy quiet. I checked my phone. No signal, which was expected. The compass pointed north. Everything seemed fine. I kept going. About 10 minutes later, the trail split in two. I knew for a fact there was no fork on the map. Both paths looked identical, packed dirt, faint traces of boots, scattered roots. I chose the left one, the way people always choose when they do not know where to go. Almost immediately, I felt it, that strange sensation, as if someone was watching my back, the kind every person recognizes when your neck tightens and you turn without thinking, expecting to see someone standing there. I turned. There was no one, only pines and shadows between them, slightly thicker than they should have been for mid-afternoon. I kept walking, faster now. After some time, I noticed a tree, an old pale oak, almost white, marked with black scars along the trunk. Leaning at a strange angle over the path, I passed it and moved on. 15 minutes later, I saw it again. The same pale oak, the same lean, the same marks. I stood there staring at it, and slowly a realization formed in my head, one I did not want to accept. I had walked in a full circle, in a windless forest, with a compass in my hand. I had come back to the exact same point. I looked at the compass again. The needle was trembling. I turned and walked strictly south, steady, counting my steps, and at step 400, I saw the oak again, standing to the right of the trail, leaning in the exact same way. I stepped closer and ran my hand along the bark. The marks, 3 diagonal scratches, were at the height of my shoulder. I could not explain it. That was the first moment I was truly afraid. Not that childish tremor from a scary story, but a cold, adult fear rising from the stomach to the throat, tightening everything, cutting through thought, leaving only instinct. I sat on a root and forced myself to breathe slowly. The sun was already lowering. I could see it through the branches. Maybe 2 hours of daylight left. That was when I heard the footsteps. Not close, far off to the side, somewhere behind the trees. Slow, heavy, steady, the kind of sound made by something large, either a very big man or something not human at all. The steps moved parallel to me, not getting closer, not falling behind. I stayed still and listened, and then they stopped too. I took one step. They took one step. I ran. I ran without following the trail, jumping over roots, pushing through branches, feeling them scrape against my arms and face, and the footsteps kept pace behind the trees. I could hear them even through my own running, through the pounding of my heart, through the cracking of sticks under my feet. And then suddenly the forest ended. I burst out onto a dirt road and dropped to my knees straight into the mud, my hands sinking into it, my breath tearing through my chest. I stayed there for a long time without getting up. When I finally turned back, the forest stood like a solid wall, dense, unmoving, silent, no footsteps, no movement, only 3 pines at the edge, and between them. A shadow darker than everything around it, a shape that did not belong. I did not wait to see if it would move. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when there was no one around? Because we never believed a forest could make that feeling so sharp and undeniable. There were 4 of us, and the night began as ordinary, with tents, a campfire, quiet conversations, laughter, the smell of smoke and cold air biting at our faces, while distant rustling echoed in the dark and branches snapped under animals. Yet none of it seemed unusual at the time. I woke up earlier than the others, and the first thing I noticed was the silence, a strange, heavy stillness, as if the forest had frozen completely, and even the usual night sounds had disappeared. And when I lifted my head, I saw that the tent zipper was open halfway, even though I clearly remembered closing it before falling asleep. I walked to the neighboring tent and saw the same thing, and inside, the items had shifted slightly. A backpack moved half a step from where it had been, a flashlight placed where it had never been left before. Everything arranged too neatly, almost carefully, as if someone had tried to leave order behind while making sure no trace remained. I called the others, and their faces went pale, as they saw the same changes inside their own tents. No one had heard footsteps during the night. No one remembered the sound of zippers being opened, and the ground around the camp was soft and damp, yet completely untouched, with no footprints, no marks from stakes, no signs of animal tracks, nothing at all. Everything we were seeing defied logic, and the longer we stood there, the stronger the unease became. We began walking around the camp, checking everything, and inside me a growing sense of presence took hold. Every object looked different. Every small shift felt intentional, like a message from something unseen. And I remembered leaving my flashlight near the edge of the tent. Yet now it rested right by the entrance, my sleeping bag slightly displaced, and the silence pressed in harder. With no wind, no insects, no birds, as if the entire forest had paused to watch us. We checked the ground again, searched the trails around the camp, but found nothing. No broken branches, no disturbances, no sign that anything had been there, and the feeling inside me deepened. That the forest no longer belonged to us, that we had stepped into something that did not follow normal rules, where every step echoed too loudly in my head, and every sound felt like a warning. We tried to explain it away. Maybe the wind, maybe an animal. But wind does not carefully unzip tents and shift objects with precision, and an animal would have left tracks in the soft ground, which meant this was something else, something that did not fit into anything we understood. One of those moments where logic fails and all that remains is to watch and wait. We packed up the tents and moved through the forest, but the unease stayed with us, growing heavier with every step, as if something invisible was moving nearby, following, observing, and the forest itself no longer felt familiar. Every motion carried weight. Every sound felt deliberate, like a quiet warning we could not ignore. When we finally left the camp, I turned back several times, and everything looked normal. Trees, trails, soft ground, nothing out of place. Yet I knew what we had seen. The open zippers, the moved objects, the absence of any trace. Something had been there, something we could not see, and that feeling has never left me. Because a forest can appear empty, and still something can be watching. I realized something was following me the moment I stopped hearing my own footsteps. In the woods, sound usually comes back to you. You hear branches cracking under your feet, leaves shifting, small echoes bouncing between the trees. But at some point, all of that disappeared. It felt as if the sound itself had been swallowed. And right after that, something else replaced it. Something that did not belong to me. Footsteps behind me. I did not turn around. I kept walking, pretending not to notice anything. It was automatic, like my body refused to acknowledge danger until it had no other choice. I was alone, deep in the woods, several kilometers from the nearest road. The plan was simple: walk the route and stay overnight. I had done it before, but this time, something was wrong. The footsteps came again, slightly faster than mine. Then they stopped the exact moment I stopped. That was not coincidence anymore. I turned sharply. Nothing. Just trees, dark trunks, shadows, damp ground. Night was already settling in, and the light was fading fast. I scanned the area again. Nothing. And still, the feeling stayed. Something was there. I kept moving, but my pace changed. Faster now. No pauses. I wanted to reach my camp before full darkness. 10 minutes later, the footsteps returned. Closer this time, and different, uneven, with small delays. as if whatever was following me was trying to match my rhythm but could not quite keep up. I turned again, and this time, I saw something. Not a shape, not a person. Movement between the trees at eye level, fast, but not fast enough to disappear completely. I stood there, staring at that exact point. And then I understood the worst part. It was not running away. It was repositioning, moving from tree to tree, staying within view, but never long enough to be clearly seen. Darkness fully covered the woods. I turned on my flashlight. The beam carved out a narrow tunnel of light. Everything else became deeper, thicker, almost solid, and that was where it stayed. I started moving faster, then almost running. The footsteps behind me synchronized. They no longer stopped. It was not hiding anymore. It kept the distance, like it was waiting. I decided not to leave the trail. It was the only line I could control. Everything else was chaos. And then I noticed something else. The sound was wrong. Not two legs. More. I stopped abruptly to check. The footsteps behind me made one more movement and stopped too. The distance stayed exactly the same. I did not turn for a few seconds. I just stood there and listened. Silence. Then a very quiet shift, like something transferring weight from one point to another. I slowly turned. The flashlight slid across the trees, and for a moment, caught it. It was low to the ground, not standing at full height. And the moment the light hit it, it straightened up. Too fast. Too unnatural. I did not wait. I turned and ran. Branches hit my arms, my face, but I did not slow down. The light bounced violently, tearing pieces of the woods out of the darkness in front of me. And behind me, the sound. No more hiding. Fast. Multi-point. It was running. I did not look back until I felt it was too close. Close enough to feel it in the air. I turned while running, and I saw it. Several long limbs touching the ground at different angles. A stretched body moving too fast to understand. And the worst part, the sound did not match the movement. It lagged behind, like it was out of sync. I burst into my campsite and did not stop. I grabbed my backpack and kept moving toward the road. The mistake was staying until night. The bigger mistake was not leaving the moment I felt the first sign. The woods started to change. The trail seemed to fade. The trees grew denser. The flashlight no longer helped. It only showed how little I could actually see. And the sound, it was no longer chasing. It was beside me. Sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left, sometimes behind, like it was overtaking me and circling back. I reached the road suddenly. One moment there were trees, the next, nothing. And just like that, the sound stopped. Completely. I did not stop moving until I reached my car. I locked myself inside and sat there for a long time without moving. And only when I turned on the interior light, I saw it. On my backpack, there were marks. Dirty, long, parallel, like fingers. I do not remember anything touching me, but it had been close enough. My grandfather was a man who could not be frightened until the woods began to rearrange itself right in front of our eyes. We found an abandoned ruin, but every time we tried to leave, we ended up back at it again. Each time the house looked newer, as if time itself were running backward. The roof slowly repaired itself. The walls straightened. And then my grandfather received a phone call from someone who had died 30 years earlier. I was 10 years old at the time. We went mushroom picking early in the morning, before the heat arrived. We left the car near an old woods road and continued on foot deeper into the woods. My grandfather knew that area well. We had been there many times before. At first, everything felt normal. Soft moss under our boots, damp earth, quiet air. We walked slowly with baskets in our hands, cutting mushrooms with a knife and placing them carefully inside. Every few minutes, we called out to each other so we would not get lost. The problem started when we walked too far. I remember the trees becoming thicker and the light fading. The woods seemed to close around us. The path narrowed until it almost disappeared. My grandfather said we would collect a few more mushrooms and then head back. That was when the old cabin appeared between the trees. It was half collapsed. The roof had fallen inward. Rotten boards hung loose from the walls. The windows had no glass, only dark, empty openings. One side of the structure leaned badly, as if the entire building could collapse at any moment. We had no intention of going near it. We simply began collecting mushrooms nearby because there were many of them. Large ones, clean and growing close together. My grandfather immediately told me not to approach the cabin. He said places like that were dangerous because of broken boards, rusty nails, and old metal. I listened, at first. But the closer I moved toward the cabin, the more mushrooms I saw. They were growing almost against the walls. I took a few steps sideways, then a few more. I only wanted to cut a large mushroom near the corner of the building. That was when I heard the voice. It was quiet, very close. The voice came from the darkness inside the cabin. It told me to come closer. I froze. Something inside my chest tightened instantly. I did not answer. I did not shout. I simply stared at the black doorway where the door should have been. Then something flew out of the darkness and landed near my feet. A crumpled piece of paper. I barely had time to jump back before my grandfather was already running toward me. He grabbed my shoulder and pulled me away from the cabin. Then he picked up the paper and unfolded it. I had never seen his face change the way it did when he read it. There were only a few words written on it. Come inside alone. It is interesting in here. At that exact moment, a quiet child's laughter came from inside the cabin. It was not loud, not sharp, but it was so close and so unnatural that my grandfather immediately shoved the note into his pocket. He grabbed my hand and pulled me back toward the path. At first, we only walked quickly. Hen faster. Then we were almost running. I looked back only once. The cabin still stood between the trees exactly as before, but I had the strange feeling that someone was watching us from the dark window. After a few minutes, we should have reached the familiar turn in the path that led back to the car. Instead, we arrived at the same cabin again. But now it looked different. The walls seemed taller. The roof was not as collapsed anymore. It looked as if someone had repaired part of the building in those few minutes. My grandfather stopped so suddenly that I ran straight into his back. That was when I realized we were not simply lost. We were walking in circles around something that should not have been there. My grandfather did not say a word. He squeezed my hand harder and led me in another direction. Not along the same path we came from, but along a narrow, overgrown trail nearby. I could see he was trying not to panic, but his steps became fast and heavy. We walked for maybe 5 minutes, and once again, we came back to the cabin. Now it looked even more complete. The roof almost covered the entire structure. One wall that had previously collapsed now stood straight again. Something moved inside one of the window openings. I saw a dark silhouette pass slowly from one side to the other, as if it was walking inside the room and knew we were watching. I gripped my grandfather's hand so tightly that my wrist began to hurt. He pushed me behind his back and stared at the cabin for several seconds. Then he said we would leave the path entirely. He said the woods could not possibly lead us to the same place if we moved straight through it. We turned directly into the trees. We pushed through bushes, fallen trunks, and wet moss. Branches struck our arms and faces. I tripped once, then again. My grandfather would not let me fall. He pulled me forward almost by force. We walked without direction. That was when I began to hear it. Something was moving behind us. It was not running. It was not breaking branches. It was simply following. Sometimes the sound came from the right, sometimes from the left. Sometimes it felt directly behind our backs. Whenever we stopped for a second, the sound stopped too. We never turned around. Then, through the trees, I saw the wooden wall again. The same cabin. Now it looked almost completely intact. Old and dark from age, but no longer destroyed. It looked like a real house that had simply been abandoned long ago. In one window, something stood perfectly still. It was not a full person, just a tall, dark mass behind the opening. But it was definitely there. My grandfather cursed quietly under his breath. That frightened me more than anything else. He never swore in front of me. We began stepping backwards slowly. He did not want to turn his back on the cabin. I kept staring at the window and noticed that the dark shape was no longer standing deep inside the room. It had moved closer, almost directly at the opening. Then my grandfather's phone rang. The sound exploded in the silence. I flinched in shock. My grandfather instinctively reached into his pocket. He looked down at the screen for a single second. Then he lifted his head again toward the cabin. It was gone. Completely gone. There were only trees ahead of us. Bushes, wet soil, old stumps. No house, no wall, no window, nothing. Only woods. We did not even talk about it. We did not search for it. My grandfather simply grabbed my shoulder and pulled me toward a path that suddenly appeared a few meters to the right. A normal forest path. Wide, familiar, as if it had always been there. We almost ran. I was out of breath and stumbling, but my grandfather did not slow down. Somewhere behind us, a branch cracked once, then again, as if something was following us all the way to the edge of the forest, but was not in a hurry. When we finally reached the car, my grandfather immediately opened the door and pushed me inside. He threw the basket into the trunk and got behind the wheel. His hands were shaking. I saw it clearly. We drove away in silence. When we reached the highway, he took the note from his pocket. He looked at it one more time. Then, without saying a word, he tore it into small pieces. He opened the window and threw them out onto the road. We never went back there again. And only many years later did I realize something that still unsettles me. When the phone rang and the cabin disappeared, my grandfather looked at the screen for only a second. There was no phone number. There was only one word: Alan. We were looking for urban legends. Instead, we found an abandoned cabin that seemed to breathe and change its shape. That night, we learned something important. The most terrifying thing is not a man with an axe standing in the corner. The most terrifying moment is when you turn around and realize the door you walked through a minute ago is gone. We entered that cabin exactly at midnight. Almost immediately, we understood that we had made a serious mistake. I remember every second of that night. Not because I want to remember it. My mind simply refuses to let me forget. Earlier that evening, my friend and I were sitting in our dorm room talking about an old forest cabin a few miles outside the city. Strange stories had been circulating about that place for years. People said a family once lived there and died under mysterious circumstances. After that, the house remained abandoned. Local residents never went there anymore. Of course, that made it sound like a perfect idea for a midnight visit. Around 11, we started walking through the forest. The sky was completely dark with no moon at all. The only light came from the flashlights on our phones. After about 40 minutes, the silhouette of the cabin appeared between the trees. The building was small, an old wooden structure with a crooked roof and dark, empty windows. It looked completely lifeless. No lights, no sound. We stepped closer. The door was slightly open. At exactly midnight, we walked inside. The cabin was silent. Dust hung in the air along with the smell of old wood and dampness. Our flashlight beams moved slowly along the walls. There was an old table in the center of the room. A worn couch stood against one wall. Near the opposite side, there was an iron bed with sagging springs. Everything looked abandoned for years. Nothing unusual. Until my friend pointed his flashlight at the wall. I saw it at almost the same moment he did. Dark stains covered the wooden boards. Blood. Fresh blood. It still glistened in the flashlight beam and slowly ran down the wall. We stood there for several seconds without moving, and at that exact moment the door behind us slammed shut. A loud metallic click echoed through the room. We rushed to the door immediately. The handle would not move. Someone had locked it from the outside. At the same moment, my friend's flashlight went out. The cabin was suddenly almost completely dark. I found a switch on the wall and pressed it. The light exploded above us in a harsh, cold yellow glow. The lamp hanging from the ceiling began to flicker. The room fell into darkness and then lit up again over and over. We tried to break the door open with our shoulders, again and again. The old wood did not even crack. Then the light flickered once more. For a second, the room went completely dark. When the light came back, I saw him, standing in the corner. A tall human silhouette, completely motionless. The light went out again. When the lamp flashed on the next time, the corner was empty. At that moment, we knew one thing for certain. We were not alone in that cabin. The light kept flickering. Every time the lamp went dark, I was terrified he would be closer. We searched the entire room. The windows were boarded up from the outside. Thick planks nailed with old rusty nails. The door remained locked. We slammed into it with our shoulders again and again. Nothing happened. The light went out again. This time the darkness lasted longer. I could hear only my own breathing and the quiet creaking of wood. Then the light returned. He was closer now. He stood in the middle of the room. A tall, thin figure, something long in his hand. Then I understood what it was. An axe. The light flickered again. Darkness. We started searching desperately for another exit. Our hands slid across the walls and rough wooden boards. When the light flashed on again, the door was gone. In its place, there was only a solid wooden wall. I remember that moment with terrifying clarity. It felt as if the house had suddenly become a completely different place. We ran around the room searching for anything at all. The light continued to flicker. and every time it came back, the silhouette was slightly closer. Then we found a metal hatch in the floor near the wall, old and heavy but not locked. We pulled it open together. Underneath there was a narrow tunnel, just packed earth and wooden support beams. We did not think. We climbed down immediately. I crawled first. Behind me, I heard my friend slam the hatch shut. We crawled through the tunnel for several minutes in almost total darkness. The air was cold and damp. Then I saw a faint light ahead. We climbed out of the tunnel. The sky was already getting brighter. The sun was rising slowly above the forest. We did not stop. We just ran through the trees as fast as we could. Our lungs burned. Our legs almost collapsed under us. When we were already far away, I turned around once. I regretted it immediately. Near the cabin between the trees stood the same man, tall, completely still, holding the axe in his hand. He was looking directly at us. We never told anyone about what happened that night, and we never returned to that forest again. We stepped inside that cabin for only 30 minutes. When we ran back outside, the sun was already gone. Our bicycles had disappeared. In Athens, Ohio, people say the Wayne National Forest can steal time. That day, the forest took 12 hours of our lives, and the thing that started climbing out of the basement almost took our lives as well. I still remember that morning very clearly, even though several years have passed. My brother and I were second-year college students in the town of Athens, Ohio. We often rode our bicycles through the forest outside the city. There was an old forest road we had been using since high school. We knew those woods almost by memory. That day, we left around 10 in the morning. The air was cool and quiet. It was a normal autumn day. We planned to ride for a couple of hours and then return to the dorm. About 40 minutes later, we turned onto a narrow trail where we had ridden many times before. That was where we saw something that should not have been there. Between the trees stood an old wooden cabin. I immediately felt that something was wrong. We had passed that road dozens of times. There had never been any building there before. The forest had always been empty. The cabin looked old. Dark wooden boards, a crooked roof, and small windows. The door was slightly open. There were no tire tracks and no signs of people nearby. We left our bicycles near a tree and walked closer. Inside the cabin, it was dark and smelled of damp wood. The floor creaked under our feet. Old junk was scattered in the corners. Robert pulled out his phone and started taking photographs. At first, the place felt strange, but also a little interesting. It looked as if nobody had touched it for many years. There were 2 small rooms inside. A table stood in the middle. A chair lay overturned on the floor. In the corner, there were stairs leading down to a basement. That was the moment when I first felt we had made a mistake by entering that place. Cold air drifted up from the basement. The darkness down there looked thick and almost black. I was standing near the stairs when I heard a sound, a quiet creaking noise behind us. We both turned at the same time. The door we had walked through slowly closed. Then we heard the sharp click of a lock. We ran to it immediately. The door would not open. The handle would not move. At first, we thought some old mechanism had jammed. But then we heard something else. From below. From the basement. Slow footsteps. We stood frozen. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt it in my throat. Robert slowly pointed the camera of his phone toward the stairs. The darkness down there seemed to move. Then we heard another sound. Someone softly tapped on one of the wooden steps. Once. Then again. After that, something started climbing the stairs. Not quickly. Slowly. as if it was deliberately taking its time. We stepped back toward the wall. I thought about the windows, but they were boarded shut from the outside. The footsteps came closer. Then a hand appeared from the darkness. Pale, dirty, long, thin fingers. The hand slowly gripped the edge of a step. At that moment, a very clear thought appeared in my mind. We had entered a place where we were never supposed to be, and now something inside did not want us to leave. We did not wait for whatever was in the basement to climb all the way out. Robert grabbed the old chair and slammed it into the door as hard as he could. The wood cracked, but the lock held. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. Then they started again, slower, as if the thing knew we were trapped. I ran to the window and started kicking the boards with my foot. The wood creaked and shook, but it did not break. Whoever had nailed those boards had done it very carefully. Behind us, another stair creaked. We turned around. The hand was higher now. Another hand appeared beside it. Then part of a head slowly rose from the darkness. The shadows clung to it like something alive. I could not see a face, only movement. We made the only decision we had left. We ran toward the door together and began slamming into it with our shoulders. Once, twice, 3 times. Suddenly the lock snapped. The door flew open and we practically fell outside. I remember the sunlight burning in my eyes. We ran several steps before stopping, and then it became even worse. It was dark, completely dark. The forest around us was covered in night. We looked at our phones. The clock showed almost 10 in the evening. We had been inside the cabin for no more than 30 minutes. Our bicycles were gone. Only an empty space remained near the tree. Then we heard a sound. The cabin door slowly creaked open behind us. We did not turn around. We just ran. 10 miles through the forest and along the road, in complete darkness. No flashlights. Almost no strength left in our bodies. The entire time I felt that something was following us. Somewhere between the trees. Not rushing. Just walking behind us. When my brother and I finally reached the town and called the police, they returned to the forest with us. Our tracks were there. Footprints where we had run through the woods. But the cabin was gone. There was only an empty clearing between the trees, as if it had never existed at all. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in .45 caliber rounds and heavy-duty deadbolts. But when you wake up in a ranger tower 40 miles from civilization and see a fresh handprint on the inside of the glass hatch, you start counting your ammo. The hatch was locked tight all night. The motion sensors on the stairs stayed silent the whole time. The print wasn't just some greasy sweat mark. It was blood. And it was at a height no human could reach without scaling the sheer exterior wall of the tower. Blackwood sector. My job is patrolling abandoned logging roads. It's not about ecology. It's about the fact that people keep vanishing in these woods. No tracks, no gear, no screams. I stepped out onto the tower gallery. The thermal imager showed a clean square around the building, but an instinct honed by years of service was screaming at me. I headed down, keeping my carbine leveled at chest height. On the second step, I froze. The steel support of the tower was gouged, deep furrows in the metal, as if someone had used rebar for claws. The tracks led straight into the thicket. I shouldn't have followed them, but this is my zone. I pushed through the flattened grass. 200 meters in, I found my first marker. Hanging from a tall pine, 10 feet up, was a torn jacket. My jacket. The one I left inside the locked tower last night. It was turned inside out and wrapped tight around the trunk. The sleeves were tied in a knot you couldn't undo without a knife. I felt the stare. It wasn't paranoia. It was physical pressure on the back of my neck. I spun around, snapping the muzzle up. Nothing. Just tree trunks. But the bushes to my left were still swaying. Something massive had moved through there a second ago. Silently. No snapping branches. Just the heavy, cloying scent of old meat. I began to back away toward the tower, never turning my spine to the woods. Every step I took was mirrored by a quiet, barely audible click, like someone flipping a toggle switch in the dark. I picked up the pace. The clicking got faster. It was right behind the tree I had just passed. I fired into the brush at random. Silence followed. No sound of a falling body, no heavy retreat. Only 3 seconds later, my own empty casing flew out of the brush. Someone had caught it in midair and tossed it back at my feet. I barricaded myself at the top. The steel hatch was blocked with a heavy tool chest. I killed every light. I see better in the dark. The thermal monitor sat on the floor. Around 2 a.m, the tower shuddered. It wasn't the wind. Something massive slammed into one of the steel supports below. The impact was so violent, the glasses on my desk jumped. I checked the thermal. A white smear filled the screen. Huge, irregular. It was hugging the tower support. The object's temperature was off the charts. It was burning hot, nearly 60 degrees Celsius. No animal in these woods has a body temp like that. It started to climb. I heard the metal groan under its weight. It didn't use the stairs. It scaled the outer wall, digging claws directly into the steel. The sound of shredding metal was worse than any scream. I moved to the window. In the faint moonlight, I saw the top of a head rise above the gallery floor. No hair. Dark, wet skin. No eyes were visible. Only deep, hollow pits. It froze, pressed against the glass. I was standing 2 inches away from it, separated only by tempered panes. It started to breathe. The glass fogged up instantly. It raised a hand, long, with far too many joints, and began to trace a finger slowly across the glass. The sound was like stone grinding on sandpaper. It was drawing a diagram. It was the floor plan of my tower, with an X marked exactly where I was standing. I fired straight through the glass. The shot shattered the pane, but the thing vanished instantly. No fall, no sound of landing. I shoved the barrel through the broken window and emptied 3 more rounds into the dark. I spent the rest of the night in the center of the room with a knife in my hand. Every 30 minutes, it came back. It didn't attack. It just circled the perimeter of the gallery, scratching the walls. It threw pebbles, bits of bark, and small animal bones through the broken window. It was studying my reaction, testing to see if I was still at the breaking point. At dawn, everything stopped. I went down once the sun was high. My truck, parked at the base of the tower, was flipped onto its roof. All 4 tires weren't just punctured, they were ripped out along with the rims. I walked toward the nearest highway. I didn't take my radio. I took nothing but my weapon. 2 miles down the road, I found my own ranger badge. It was hammered into a tree at eye level. I reached the highway 6 hours later. I don't work for the Forest Service anymore. In my report, I wrote bear attack. But I know bears don't collect shell casings, and bears don't draw floor plans. Now, when I lock the door to my city apartment, I always check the glass for a fogged-up breath mark. Because I know, whatever was in those woods didn't just hunt me, it marked me. 9th day of the patrol, Sector 41, deep in the Appalachians. I was sitting by the campfire when I heard that sound. Not a snapping branch, not the hoot of an owl. It was my own voice. My own morning report over the radio that I had transmitted to headquarters 8 hours ago. Word for word, with the same rasp in my throat. For a ranger, hearing this was beyond strange. The sound came from the darkness, just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam. I checked the radio on my belt. It was switched off, but my voice from the woods continued to report a clear sector. Only now, it had intonations I never put there. Slow, stretched-out sounds, as if something were learning to pronounce my words right then and there. I extinguished the fire in one motion, smothering it with a piece of heavy tarp. Light is a target. Absolute silence fell over the forest. Not a single cricket, not a single rustle of leaves, only a heavy, damp suffocation. I took the safety off my carbine. The metal chilled my fingers, and that cold was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. A minute later, the sound repeated. Closer now. Copy dispatch Sector 41. All clear, something whispered to my right. The voice became higher, unnatural. I began to back away, never turning my back to the sound. My boots sank into the moss as I tried not to breathe. I know this forest. There are no echoes here that last for 8 hours. There are no people. The nearest campsite is 20 miles away. Whatever was in the bushes began to move. It wasn't the run of an animal. It was a heavy, arrhythmic stomp. Something massive was moving on 2 limbs, crushing the undergrowth. I clicked on my barrel light for just a second. The beam caught a tall, pale figure between the pines. Arms far too long, joints twisted at angles that do not exist in nature. It didn't blink or flinch from the light. It just froze. I fired. The bullet hit a tree, the crack of the shot shattering the silence. But instead of a cry of pain, I heard laughter. My own laughter. Loud, looping like a corrupted recording. I turned and bolted. I ran for 3 miles. My lungs were burning, and the metallic taste of iron in my mouth made it hard to swallow. I didn't look back, but I could hear it following me. It wasn't rushing. It knew exactly where the trail led. It was mimicking the sounds of my flight. The heavy stomp of my boots echoed behind my back with perfect precision. There it was, the fire watchtower, a steel structure on stilts. I flew up the metal stairs, nearly dropping my carbine. I slammed the hatch shut, bolted it, and collapsed onto the floor. At the top, there was only a 3 by 3 meter glass cabin. Nowhere to hide. 10 minutes passed. I sat in the corner, aiming my barrel at the hatch. Suddenly, a dull thud against the iron came from below. Then another. It began to climb, slowly. Every step on the stairs was accompanied by my own whisper rising from beneath. Someone is here. I see him. Help. It was repeating the thoughts I was too afraid to say out loud. It stopped right in front of the hatch. Through the gap, I saw long, thin fingers with filthy claws gripping the edge of the steel frame. It didn't try to break the door down. It began to scratch the metal. The sound was like a knife cutting into living flesh. "Open up," it said. It wasn't my voice. It was the voice of my wife. Clear, calm, and domestic. She died 3 years ago. "Open up, it's cold out here." I covered my ears with my hands, but the voice penetrated my skull. Then the sound changed. It became the hysterical barking of my dog, the one killed by wolves last winter. Then, a child's scream. The tower swayed under the creature's weight. The glass in the cabin began to crack from the vibration. I realized then, it doesn't want to come in. It's waiting for me to lose my mind and walk out myself. I looked at my thermal imager. The screen showed absolute black on the stairs. No heat. A cold, dead void blocking my only exit. I sat there like that until dawn. When the first rays hit the glass, the sounds stopped. I cautiously opened the hatch. The stairs were empty, but on every single step from top to bottom lay items from my backpack that I had lost in the woods. My knife, my keys, my photo, and the last thing, the shell casing from the bullet I fired that night. It was still warm. I climbed down and headed for the park exit. I won't take my things. I'm never coming back for my paycheck. In my pocket, the radio suddenly hissed to life. "Copy Sector 41, a voice said from the station. I didn't answer, because I knew the voice on the other end was no longer human. I found him at the 11th mile. My partner's pickup truck was riddled with holes and slammed into an old maple tree. The engine was still clicking as it cooled down, but the cab was empty. His service pistol lay on the driver's seat, jammed on the second round. There were no signs of a struggle and no blood around the vehicle. Only deep dents scarred the roof, as if something massive had dropped from above. But the worst part was the rear-view mirror. My own set of keys was hanging right there. The same keys I had left in the lock of my watchtower 10 miles away this morning. In our ranger unit, there is one golden rule: never go out to the 11th mile without a partner. Looking at those keys, I finally understood why. I did not call for backup on the radio. In this sector, a signal is just noise that gives away your exact location. I checked my Remington 870 instead. 5 shells in the tube and 1 in the chamber. The air was bone dry. It smelled of pine resin and something chemical, like burning rubber. I started following the trail. This was not a human trail. Someone or something had dragged a heavy sack, leaving a wide furrow in the wet needles. Every 100 meters, the furrow stopped and the imprints began. Deep holes were driven into the earth like heavy pilings. The distance between each step was nearly 10 feet. This was not a biological norm. The forest grew thicker as the light struggled to pierce the canopy. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. It was that electric feeling in the air before a storm, but there was no storm coming. I stopped and froze. Up ahead, behind a dense thicket, I heard a sound. It was a rhythmic clicking of metal against metal, steady and mechanical. I raised my aim. A figure emerged from behind the trees. It was tall, far too thin, and moved in jerks like a broken marionette. It was wearing a ranger's uniform. It was Mark, my partner. But he was not walking. His feet were not even touching the forest floor. Something black was holding him by the neck, blending perfectly into the treetops. He was suspended in midair. His legs were merely twitching from the movement of whatever was above him. I fired. The buckshot shredded the leaves and Mark hit the ground. A black shadow vanished instantly into the heights. I ran to him. He was alive, but his eyes had been sewn shut. Not with thread, but with thick fishing wire. His mouth was stuffed full of dry pine needles. I grabbed his tactical vest and hauled him backward. In that exact second, a dead pine tree crashed down right where I had been standing. It shattered into splinters as if hit by an artillery shell. I dragged Mark through the brush. He was heavy, a dead weight, but I could not leave him behind. A whistle echoed from behind us. It was short and sharp, like a police whistle, but with a metallic screech. Then came another from the left, then one from the right. They were herding us toward the marsh. I shoved Mark under an upturned root and took a firing position. 40 yards ahead, the trees began to part. It was not the wind. Something invisible and massive was simply pushing them aside. I could only see a distortion in the air, like heat rising off hot asphalt. I fired into the center of that shimmering haze. I heard a loud metallic clang as the slug ricocheted off something solid. In response, a stone the size of a fist came flying back. The rock slammed into my shoulder and popped the joint. I screamed, but immediately clamped my hand over my mouth. The pain was so white-hot that my vision went dark. I realized then that it does not use claws or teeth. It uses tools. It uses the forest itself as a weapon against me. I pulled a flare from my pocket. This was my last chance. I struck it and threw it forward. The brilliant red light caught the object. It was a construction, not an animal, not a man. It looked like a rusty tripod 10 feet tall, draped in human clothes and shards of mirrors. At the very top sat a camera, an old industrial surveillance camera that turned with a distinct mechanical click. It was blinded by the flare. The camera began to spin chaotically. I grabbed Mark by the collar and made a final desperate lung toward the road. Behind me, I heard the thing start smashing through the timber, moving blindly. It sounded like a bulldozer tearing through the woods. We burst onto the road just as dusk was settling in. I threw Mark into the bed of a random pickup truck that had stopped because of my shot. The driver wanted to ask a question, but he saw my face and he saw what was lying in the back. He slammed the gas pedal to the floor. I looked back. At the edge of the woods, the figure stood tall. It was no longer hiding. It stood perfectly still under the light of the first stars. Suddenly, the radio in my pocket came to life. I thought it was dead. My own voice came through the speaker. But it was not speaking. It was playing the sound of my own scream from when my shoulder was broken. Steady and rhythmic, like a looping alarm clock. Mark survived, but he never spoke again. The doctors said a portion of his brain responsible for speech had been removed through his eye sockets. I quit the service the next day. Now, I live in the Nevada desert. There are no trees here. You can see for miles in every direction. But sometimes at night, I hear an old camera clicking outside my window. And then I take my shotgun and I wait for the morning.